May 4, 1945. The castle above the valley. It was the last spring of the war, but the mountains of Tyrol didn't know it yet. Cold mist crawled over the stone walls of Castle Itter, a medieval fortress perched above a narrow valley in western Austria. Inside, behind iron gates and barbed wire, the world's strangest collection of prisoners waited. Former premiers Édouard Daladier and Paul Reynaud, generals Gamelin and Weygand, even Charles de Gaulle's sister Marie-Agnès Callao. They had been enemies in politics, rivals in command, and now shared one crumbling cell block guarded by SS troops who no longer believed in victory. Outside the walls, gunfire had become random background noise. The Third Reich was collapsing like a burning cathedral, majestic, doomed, and loud. U.S. armored units were rolling east, Soviets closing from the other side. Between them, fragments of the German army were breaking apart, surrendering, or turning on each other. In the nearby town of Wurgel, Major Joseph Gangl, commander of a handful of Wehrmacht artillerymen, faced an impossible choice. He had fought since Poland, survived the Eastern Front, and now refused to die for the SS. Gangl had seen enough killing for 10 lifetimes. His men called him der gute Deutsche, the good German, half as a joke, half as a warning. Rumors reached him that the SS planned to execute the French prisoners before the Americans arrived. Gangl knew the unit stationed near Castle Itter, fanatics from the 17 SS Panzergrenadier Division. They had already shot civilians for flying white flags. To do nothing would mean mass murder. To act meant turning his guns on his own comrades. At dawn on May 4, Gangl gathered his remaining troops in a barn. The air smelled of hay, oil, and fear. He said, "I will not fight for murderers. If you feel otherwise, leave now." No one left. They painted white cloths on their trucks, took a radio from a police station, and drove straight into territory now crawling with American scouts. Outside Kufstein, they found a reconnaissance patrol from the U.S. 23rd Tank Battalion led by Lieutenant John C. Jack Lee Jr., a 27-year-old tanker from Pennsylvania, with a reputation for reckless courage. The first meeting was tense, Wehrmacht uniforms facing olive drab helmets. But Gangl raised his hands and spoke in broken English. "We fight SS. We need help. Prisoners, French officers." Lee didn't believe it at first. Then he saw the desperation in Gangl's eyes. "All right," he said. "Show me." Together, this improbable alliance, 10 German soldiers, a single U.S. Sherman tank, and a few American infantrymen, rolled toward Castle Itter. The road wound through pines and wet rock. As they climbed, Lee's tank Besotten Jenny groaned and rattled, its tracks throwing mud across Wehrmacht boots. They reached the fortress by late afternoon. The French prisoners peering from the battlements couldn't believe their eyes. German soldiers escorting Americans. It looked like a hallucination born from starvation. Daladier whispered, "The war truly has gone mad." Inside, the SS guards had fled. The mixed force secured the gate and prepared defenses. They only had one tank, a few MG-42s, and limited ammunition. Radio contact with the Americans failed. Reinforcements would not come tonight. Lee took command. He said, "We hold till morning. After that, pray the cavalry shows up." Gangl nodded. "For France," he answered quietly. Outside, distant engines echoed in the valley. The SS was regrouping. As night fell over Castle Itter, the defenders, Americans, Germans, and French VIPs waited behind crumbling walls. Somewhere below, The last true battle of the Second World War was about to begin. Night at Castle Itter, May 4-5, 1945. Darkness came early in the Tyrolean Alps. The castle's towers cut jagged silhouettes against a sky thick with rain and smoke. From the parapet, Lieutenant Jack Lee could see the valley shimmering with faint orange light, farmhouses burning where the SS had passed. He lit a cigarette, the flare of the match too bright, too risky, but nobody cared anymore. The war had gone feral. The rules were dead. Below him, in the courtyard, the French prisoners moved like ghosts between piles of ammunition and sandbags. Generals who once commanded hundreds of thousands were now stacking crates. General Wagon stooped and trembling, tied wires for field telephones beside a U.S. sergeant. Former Premier Reynaud cursed in French at an MG-42. "It hates me," he hissed. Lee smirked. "It hates everyone." Major Gangel moved among them with his small band of German artillerymen, calm and deliberate. His men had stripped insignia from their uniforms. No one wanted to be mistaken for SS when the Americans arrived. They carried carbines, one Panzerfaust, and enough grenades for a single desperate defense. Gangel's sergeant, Kurt Pfluger, whispered, "If they come in force, we're finished." Gangel answered quietly, "Then we make it cost them." Around midnight, a nervous silence settled over the courtyard. The wind carried the faint metallic click of weapons from the tree line below. Lee ordered lights out. The Sherman tank, besotten Jenny, sat at the gate like a sleeping iron animal, its barrel trained on the narrow bridge leading up to the fortress. Crewmen huddled inside, the engine off to save fuel, condensation dripping from the turret ceiling. Inside the great hall, the French prisoners sat by candlelight, eating whatever was left: canned beans, black bread, and nervous laughter. De Gaulle's sister recited psalms. Daladier argued with Reynaud about politics as if it mattered. "You see," Reynaud said, stabbing at the air with a fork, "even now we cannot agree." From the corner, an American gunner muttered, "Good thing the SS don't know that." At 2 a.m., the first shots came. Single, deliberate, probing. Bullets slapped against stone, sparking like angry insects. Lee snapped his head up. "Positions!" he shouted. The defenders scrambled to their posts. MG-42s coughed from the walls, answering the darkness. The air filled with echo and powder smoke. Flashes revealed dark shapes moving through the trees below. SS grenadiers advancing in small squads, using the slope for cover. Their commander, Stromben IV Kurt Siegfried Trader, was a fanatic even by late war standards. His men had sworn to purge traitors and Americans alike. For them, Itter was not just a castle, it was revenge. The first assault hit the gate. Rifle fire cracked from below, answered by the Sherman's 50 caliber machine gun, which roared to life, shredding branches and stone. Sparks showered from the walls as tracers cut through the rain. Lee barked orders over the din, his voice half drowned by engine thunder as Jenny powered up for cover fire. Gangel stood beside him, pistol drawn, eyes scanning the ridgeline. A burst of fire tore through the courtyard, striking near the French prisoners. Gangel grabbed a wounded GI by the collar, dragging him behind a wall. "Stay down," he shouted, his German accent thick but urgent. By 3 a.m., the attack intensified. Mortar shells whistled overhead, slamming into the outer walls. Chunks of medieval masonry tumbled into the yard. The defenders returned fire with the MG-42s until barrels smoked red. In the brief lulls, they could hear SS voices shouting commands. The enemy was regrouping, closer now. Lee's tank had taken hits to the turret. The periscope shattered. He wiped blood from his cheek and grinned at his loader. "Guess they noticed us." His humor was armor. Every man in that courtyard knew they might not see morning. Gangel found a vantage point near the main gate, firing his carbine toward muzzle flashes below. In a rare quiet second, he looked back at the French prisoners, these strange allies who had once been his enemies. For France, he had said earlier, half in irony. But now, as the SS stormed the slope, the words felt holy. Then came a scream. One of the German soldiers hit by sniper fire. Gangel leaned out to spot the shooter. A second later, a bullet struck him clean through the chest. He fell without a sound. Lee rushed over, dropping beside him. Gangel's eyes were still open. "Tell them we did right," he whispered. His hand twitched once, then stilled. Lee stared for a long second, then shouted, "Keep firing! Don't stop!" The war's strangest alliance had just lost its heart. Dawn was still hours away. The SS were massing for another push. Rain slicked the walls, turning every stone into ice. Lee knew they couldn't hold much longer, but he also knew what Gangle had died for. Not orders, not flags, but something purer. Defiance of madness itself. He climbed into the Sherman, gripped the radio handset, and screamed into static. "This is Castle Itter. We are under attack. Americans and Germans holding together. We need help, damn it." The only answer was the hiss of the storm. The first gray light of morning crept over the peaks, dissolving the mist that had hidden the enemy all night. The valley below Castle Itter looked quiet, almost peaceful, until the next mortar round screamed up and exploded against the battlements. Stone fragments and smoke rained down on the courtyard. Lieutenant Jack Lee spat grit from his mouth, ducking behind the Sherman's scorched hull. The tank's once olive paint was now gouged black and white from ricochet scars. Gang's body lay covered under a Wehrmacht jacket near the inner gate. No one had the luxury of mourning. Lee's face was streaked with soot and rain. He yelled, "Hold your fire until you see movement." The defenders were exhausted. Some hadn't slept in 30 hours. The French prisoners, men who had debated in Parliament and dined in marble halls, now clutched rifles with trembling hands. General Gamelin's fingers bled from handling hot shell casings. Reynaud limped between firing positions, shouting, "If we die, at least history will notice." A nervous laugh rippled through the courtyard. It was all they had left to stay human. From the tower, an American gunner spotted movement on the slope. He said, "They're coming again!" Through the rising fog, dark figures emerged, dozens of SS infantry, spreading out in skirmish lines. Their helmets gleamed wet under the dawn light. Behind them, a 20mm flak gun was being dragged uphill by hand, its barrel glinting like a spearhead. Lee climbed into Besutton Jenny again. He asked, "Main gun loaded?" His loader, Private Ferris, nodded. "Armor piercing, last round." Lee hesitated. "Then make it count." The tank's 75mm cannon thundered. The shell struck the slope short, exploding into a shower of mud and rock, knocking several SS men off their feet. Someone screamed, "Hit!" from the walls. But the flak gun survived, firing seconds later. Its burst slammed into the Sherman's glacis plate. The shock rang through the courtyard like a church bell. The defender's MG-42 jammed again. An American corporal kicked the receiver, cursed, then tore it open with a knife to clear the spent link. He shouted, "Back in business," cutting down another squad climbing the path. Yet the attackers kept coming, climbing, slipping, yelling, throwing grenades that bounced off the castle's ancient stones. Inside, in the grand hall, splinters rained from the ceiling. Marie-Agnes Callio helped a wounded soldier, her hand steady despite the chaos. She whispered, "Courage, mon ami. France would remember this." He smiled weakly. "If we live long enough for her to find out." Around 8 a.m. the flak gun opened up again, hammering the courtyard. One burst tore the Sherman's left track apart, immobilizing the tank for good. Smoke billowed from the engine deck. Lee kicked the hatch open, coughing. He said, "She's done! Everyone inside! Fall back!" The defenders retreated deeper into the castle's lower levels, dragging ammunition crates and wounded men. The SS fire was relentless now. Bullets punched through wooden shutters and ricocheted off medieval frescoes. On the wall stairwell, an American radio operator tried again to raise support. He said, "Thunderhead, this is Itter Castle. Do you read?" Static. He switched frequencies, hands shaking. Then, faintly, a voice. "Repeat. Who is calling?" Lee said, "This is Lieutenant Lee, Castle Itter. Americans and German army troops under attack by SS. We need armor support. Over." A pause. Then, "Say again. Americans and Germans?" Lee grabbed the receiver. "You heard me right. Get here before we're all dead." In the valley below, a reconnaissance patrol of the U.S. 142nd Infantry picked up the signal. Captain John Jack Senior turned to his driver. "Castle Itter? That's up the Ridge Road." "Yes, sir, the crazy story. Germans and Yanks fighting together." Senior slammed his map shut. Let's make it less of a story and more of a rescue." Back at the castle, the defenders had been pushed into the courtyard again. Ammunition was nearly gone. Every weapon sounded tired, bolts grinding, barrels glowing dull red. Someone shouted, "They're breaching the outer wall!" An explosion shook the datehouse. Splinters flew like knives. Lee climbed onto the rubble, firing his Thompson until the magazine clicked empty. The SS were only 50 meters away now, shouting, "Verrater! Schweinhunde!" as they charged. Then, just as suddenly, a new sound joined the storm. Deep, rhythmic, unmistakable. Tank engines. Lee froze. So did the defenders. From the tree line, muzzle flashes bloomed, but not aimed at them. 75mm shells slammed into the SS positions, scattering them like leaves. American Shermans and half-tracks were racing up the road, flags flapping from their antennas. "Reinforcements!" cried one of the Frenchmen. The defenders erupted in laughter and disbelief. Lee, covered in soot and blood, dropped his empty gun and simply leaned against the wall, grinning through the exhaustion. The SS assault broke apart instantly. Survivors melted back into the forest, leaving their dead scattered among the rocks. A few minutes later, the first Sherman burst through the castle gate, its commander waving from the turret. He said, "Heard you threw quite a party up here." Lee looked down at Gang's covered body and murmured, "You'd have liked to see this, Major." The war's strangest alliance had held. The price of the last battle. May 5th, 1945, afternoon. The echoes of gunfire faded into the valley like a storm retreating over the mountains. Smoke clung to the walls of Castle Itter, drifting in lazy spirals through the broken gates. The smell was a bitter mix of cordite, diesel, and whetstone. Lieutenant Jack Lee leaned on the barrel of his Thompson, the adrenaline finally draining from his body. His hands trembled as he holstered the weapon, not from fear, but from the sheer exhaustion of survival. All around him, men and ruins told the same story. The Sherman tank Pisaing Jenny still stood at the gate, crippled but defiant, its steel skin cratered by hits that should have killed everyone inside. Spent shell casings carpeted the yard. The French prisoners, soot-streaked and wide-eyed, moved slowly as if their minds were still catching up with the fact that they were alive. A platoon from the 142nd Infantry dismounted their half-tracks, spreading out to secure the perimeter. "What the hell happened here?" one sergeant muttered. Lee pointed to the dead SS soldiers scattered along the slope. "They happened, and then we happened right back." The newcomers stared at the strange sight before them. Wehrmacht soldiers standing shoulder to shoulder with Americans, sharing cigarettes, covering each other's wounded. One GI whispered, "Never thought I'd see that in this lifetime." Major Joseph Gangel's body was carried into the chapel room, draped with both a German tunic and an American flag torn from a jeep. The gesture wasn't planned. It simply felt right. In that small chapel, the surviving defenders gathered in silence. French, German, and American faces, some crying, some hollow, all exhausted. General Weygand, the man once blamed for France's collapse in 1940, now knelt beside the fallen German officer. "You fought with honor, Major," he said in French, though Gangel would never hear it. "You did what our nations could not. You stood together." Outside, a medic tended to a wounded GI, while a German artilleryman held the bandages. A French general poured him a cup of coffee, hands still shaking. For a few hours, no one cared about uniforms. By noon, reinforcements from the 36th Infantry Division had fully taken control of the area. The SS counterattack was over. The unit had disintegrated under the combined assault. Prisoners were rounded up in the valley, some teenagers, others veterans who refused to surrender until the end. An American correspondent who arrived that afternoon scribbled furiously into his notebook, unable to believe what he was hearing. Americans and Germans defending French VIPs from the SS? He asked incredulously. Lee shrugged. "You got it. Write it down before someone calls us liars." Orders came by radio. Hold position and await formal surrender procedures. No one cheered. The men simply sat in the courtyard, smoking in silence. Rain began again, washing blood into the cracks of the ancient stones. Lee walked along the parapet, where the battle had started hours earlier. From that height, he could see the whole valley, still beautiful, even after everything. He thought of the absurdity of it all. An American tank commander and a German officer dying side by side to protect French politicians. Hell of a war, he muttered. Below, the French prisoners gathered for a group photograph, insisting it be taken despite the mud and debris. They wanted proof, not of victory, but of sanity's brief return in a world gone insane. One of the Americans, Private Ferris, snapped a picture with a captured German Leica. In the frame, the French general stood in the middle, flanked by Lee and the surviving Wehrmacht soldiers. Behind them, Bissot and Jenny loomed like a wounded animal. It was the only image known to exist of that strange alliance, though most copies would later vanish into archives and private collections. That night, as the castle grew quiet, the men shared a final meal together, canned rations, stale bread, and a bottle of schnapps found in the cellar. They toasted to the dead, to the living, and to the fact that the world outside those walls was about to wake up from its nightmare. Lee raised his cup to Major Gangle, the bravest damn German I ever met. Pluger, Gangle's sergeant, nodded, and to Jack Lee, the craziest American I ever followed. Laughter broke out, small and fragile, but real. In the distance, the thunder of artillery had finally stopped. Hitler was dead, the Reich was finished, and on a lonely mountain road in Austria, a group of men who should have been enemies had proven that courage sometimes ignores uniforms. When dawn came again over the Tyrol Alps, Castle Itter stood silent, battered, scarred, and eternal. The flags were gone, the guns quiet. Only the echoes of that impossible alliance lingered in the morning air, carried down the valley like a whisper. The last battle was fought for honor, not conquest. Epilogue: The Castle That Remembered. The war ended 3 days later. Germany surrendered unconditionally on May 8, 1945. Across Europe, people poured into the streets, kissing strangers, waving flags, shouting the word peace until their voices broke. But in the mountains of Tyrol, Castle Itter stood quiet. The smoke had cleared, the guns were silent, and the men who'd fought there scattered like seeds into history. Lieutenant Jack Lee filed his after-action report on a single page. Joint defense of Castle Itter by U.S. and Wehrmacht troops against Waffen-SS attack, it read. The wording was clinical, stripped of absurdity. The army bureaucracy had no template for fought alongside the enemy. Major Joseph Gang was buried with full honors in Worgel. Local Austrians placed flowers on his grave each spring, calling him the man who defied the SS. His son, barely 10 years old, attended in a small wool coat, clutching a wooden cross. The Americans sent a wreath. No speeches were made. No officers stood in formation. Just silence. The kind of silence that carries more meaning than any medal. Lee returned to the United States a few months later. For years, he refused to talk about Castle Itter. He said no one would believe it. He was right. To his men, he was the kind of commander who laughed in the face of chaos, the kind of man who would drive a single tank into a fortress surrounded by Germans, then somehow make friends with them. The French VIPs went home as heroes, each claiming their own version of the story. Daladier wrote that the Americans had saved them. Reynal insisted the Germans had. Weigand said the castle itself had. None of them were entirely wrong. For a brief moment, their old rivalries disappeared. not out of forgiveness, but fatigue. They had survived history's strangest footnote. In the decades that followed, the tale of Castle Itter almost vanished. Official records were filed, forgotten, or classified. The castle returned to private hands, its walls patched and repainted. Tourists sometimes stopped to admire the view, unaware that beneath their feet lay the scars of an impossible alliance. Then, in the late 1970s, a French historian stumbled upon a U.S. Army dispatch describing Joint American-German Defensive Action, Tyrol, May 5, 1945. He thought it was a typo, but cross-referencing German police reports and eyewitness accounts brought the truth back to light. When word reached the surviving veterans, letters began to appear. Pfluger, Gang's old sergeant, wrote from Austria, "We didn't fight for Hitler. We fought for decency." Lee, by then retired in Pennsylvania, replied with a line scrawled in pencil. That day, there were no uniforms, only men. They never met again, but their correspondence became the backbone of what would later be called the last battle of World War II. In 2013, a memorial plaque was placed on Castle Itter's gate, written in 3 languages: German, English, and French. It reads, simply, "Here, on May 5, 1945, men of the U.S. Army, the Wehrmacht, and French prisoners together defended freedom against the SS." No names of generals, no politics, just an act of human sanity carved in stone. Today, Castle Itter still stands. Ivy crawls over its rebuilt walls, and the courtyard where blood once ran now hosts weddings and concerts. But if you walk there at dawn, when the fog rolls in and the valley turns silver, you can almost hear the echoes, the rattle of a jammed MG-42, the hum of a Sherman engine, the strange mix of German and American voices shouting in unison. And maybe, if you stand very still, you can sense what those men felt in their final hours. That in a world collapsing under hate, a few chose to stand together, not because they were ordered to, but because it was right.